Testing.
daughter's joining us from Spain on Zoom.
Good.
Yeah, I hope so. Are you okay? Okay. Can you hear me? Yes. Right. Well, first I'll ask the Reverend Sue to welcome us to St. Cadoc's Church and to make a few announcements.
Let's get closer. Same question, can you hear me? Yes. Well, welcome to St. Cadoc's. It's on. So welcome to St. Cadoc's. It's lovely to see so many of you here. And like you, I've come to hear all about Roman Caerllion. Now, the one thing we want is for the evening to go really well. So if there is going to be an incident like a fire, all I will say is leave the church as quickly as you can and as safely. But to help you to do that, all I will say is the exit is straight behind you, under the mezzanine through the west doors which are open. There's also through the south porch door, the way you came in, and you can go through the tower, but there's also a fire exit in the choir vestry. Now, we are not going to have a fire, are we? Wonderful. And just a reminder, if anything does happen, you just take yourself out safely. I think that's the health and safety done. So let's go on and find out about Roman Caerllion.
Well, thank you. My name is Jeremy Knight. I'm the president of the Monmouthshire Antiquarian Association, and Peter and Andy have very kindly asked me to introduce them. I was, on a personal note, I was born and brought up in Caerleon. I've known this church all my life, but the first time I've ever spoken in it. Now, I shall try to be brief. You've not come here to hear me, but I shall have to give you a brief summary of previous archaeological work at Caerleon in order to set Andy and Peter's achievements here in perspective. Peter has worked in Cardiff University, where he produced a splendid online database of Roman coin finds from Wales. He's worked in the National Museum, where he worked on the excavations at Caerwent, and he has also worked in the British Museum, where he produced a splendid catalogue of the Hoxton treasure, the finest, largest collection of late Roman gold and silver coins and various precious objects that have never been found in Britain, including a remarkable silver pepper pot, the Empress pepper pot. He now is consultant archaeologist for Via Nova Archaeology, based in Bristol. Andy, Professor Andrew Gardner, he is professor of the archaeology of the Roman Empire in the Institute of Archaeology in University of London. He has a particular interest in Roman frontiers, in Caerleon in particular, and in theoretical archaeology. I could pick out a number of starting points to describe the earlier history of Caerleon, rather the history of Roman Caerleon, I could have started with Geoffrey of Monmouth, Geoffrey Arthur's lying history of the Britons, as Giraldus Cambrensis called it. But instead, I'd like to start with the Tudor poet-topographer the author of sorry. He was a friend of William Camden, the author of the Worthiness of Wales, William, and it's well worth reading. It's well worth reading. Caerleon now step in with stately style. No feeble phrase may set to soothe thee forth. This thy famous town has spoke of many a mile. In thee hath been King Arthur's golden hall. He's well worth reading on Caerleon, but he's rather too fond of what a friend of mine calls the A word, King Arthur. In Arthur's time a table round was there whereat he sate. As yet a plot of goodly ground sets forth that rare estate. There are such vaults and hollow caves, such vaults and conduits deep, made all like pipes of earthen pots, wherein a child may creep. There's a lot more than that. The last edition, the only published edition, was, other than the original Elizabethan version, was in 1711. So perhaps it's time we had a new edition of him. He's very well worth reading, not only on Caerleon, but on Monmouthshire in particular. He was the first person who took what I call an antiquarian interest in the castles of Monmouthshire and argued for their preservation as ancient monuments. He was the older contemporary of Bishop Francis Godwin of Llandaff, who collected many of the inscriptions which we can still enjoy across the way in the Roman Museum. But leaping over the early tourists like Colt Hoare and Cox, we come to the great figure of John Edward Lee, the founder of both Caerleon Museum and of the Monmouthshire Antiquarian Association, whose badge I wear. But I'd like to bracket his name with a lesser-known figure, Elizabeth Pritchard, his friend and neighbour. She lived in the big house on the corner opposite the museum at the top of Broadway. Her memorial and that of her husband is in the church, I think in the east wall, I believe. And her collection, she had a huge collection of Roman coins, pottery, inscriptions, small finds, which formed one of the foundations of our collection in the museum. I say John Edward Lee was studied in some detail by our former secretary, Caerllion Jones, but she also deserves a mention. She was the first of a series of women archaeologists who have worked in Caerleon, including Tessa Verney Wheeler, Eileen Fox, and various others. But her collections, we had a small display of some of her finds in the museum a few years ago. She was a hands-on archaeologist. John Edward Lee has accounts of her diving into builders' trenches outside the Red Lion to rescue bits of decorated Samian and wading in the full costume of a Victorian lady into the mud of the Usk to rescue a glass cinerary urn which its founder had thrown into the Usk on learning that it contained human remains. She, I say, a very hands-on archaeologist and well reserved to be remembered. But then, after the First World War, there was a new enterprise. It's called the Caerleon Excavation Committee. And it seems to be largely forgotten today. I know of no account of it. I've seen a subscription list, and I think that a man called J.R. Gabriel was very much involved in it. But it achieved a great deal. It sponsored the original excavations at Caerllion Amphitheatre before Wheeler's excavation, although it was later, excavation was later funded by part funded by the Daily Mail, because the Times had got an exclusive on Tutankhamun. You might say that's Tutankhamun's gift to Caerleon. They also bought, the Caerleon Excavation Committee also bought Presk Field, where the Roman barracks are, and presented it to the nation after Nash Williams's excavations there. But the actual business of recovering the plan of the Roman fortress, one of the most complete, perhaps the most complete in Europe, was the work over many decades of two men, two successive keepers of archaeology in the National Museum, Victor Nash Williams and George Boone. They dug in quite difficult conditions, often on small building sites with later occupation, and with a body not of students with trowels, but with large workmen with large shovels digging trenches. In fact, George Boone once said that his workforce at Caerleon consisted of whoever came out of Cardiff prison that morning. And when I dug a few years later, I found that wasn't an exaggeration. There were two detective sergeants who were friends of the site owner turned up, and there was embarrassed mutual recognition between them and two of my workmen. But I say the work of piecing together that plan, which we're all so familiar, of the Roman fortress, was the work of decades of dedicated work by two men who made it their lives' work to recover that plan, which we're all so familiar with, of the Roman fortress. Nash Williams's final years, he moved outside the walls of the fortress, and he excavated on what's now the site of the rugby pitch. It was then Bearhouse Field, and anyone in Caerleon would tell you that it was where the Romans kept the bears for the amphitheatre, until some spoilsport came along and pointed out that in the 18th century the field had belonged to a Mr. Burroughs. But sadly, Nash was in poor health. He died quite suddenly in his early 50s as a result of overwork and medical negligence, and the site was later bulldozed. And when George Boone finally retired, a lot of people thought that all that had been said about Roman Caerleon had, for the moment, been said. Then along came Peter and Andy. Peter's excavations of the Priory Field, the subject of their book, which I hope you're all going to buy later, was the first large open area excavation in Caerleon. These open area techniques pioneered by my former colleague John Hurst at Warren Percy, John Edward Lee's back lawn, more or less, this great open area excavation. I needn't talk about the results of it. Peter's going to describe those to you. But they then, or Peter rather, then moved on to the southern Canabai, the area between the amphitheatre and the river, and showed why Caerleon had been built where it was in the first place. It was built at the lowest bridging point of the Usk. It was built at the highest point where large seagoing ships could be brought up and unloaded. The logistics for not only the feeding of the 5,000 legionaries, that is, and for the network of forts and roads with which Julius Frontinus, who founded Caerleon, finally pacified the area of the Silures. Field Marshal Wavell once said, "Supply is the essence of victory," and Julius Frontinus was well aware of that. But I think I've said quite enough. I'm going to hand over to Peter. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, God. Can you all hear me okay? Good. Thank you very much for that, Jeremy. You'll have noticed that I'm on my own tonight. Andy, unfortunately, sends his apologies and wishes you all very well. And I've got very strict instructions on what to say and what not to say from him. He can be quite bossy. But what I will show you over the next 45 minutes or so is a joint presentation about the excavation that Andy and I ran between 2007 and 2010 in Caerleon, which culminated last year in the publication of our report, about which we are extremely proud. There are copies for sale at the back, of course, and I might be signing some later on for you as well. So it's the story, effectively, our story of the excavation, and also the story of Roman Caerleon, or that particular bit of Roman Caerleon. You can access the report in various different ways. Our publishers are here with various copies, as I mentioned, at the back of the room, but it's also available as a downloadable free PDF, should you like that kind of thing too. And I should say that it represents a significant number of important firsts. As Jeremy has explained, antiquarians and archaeologists have been digging in Caerleon for 170, 180 years or so, have uncovered a great deal of very important information about Caerleon, about the Roman army, about how Britain became Roman, and all sorts of other things too. Our report is just the latest in a series of milestones, and we are pleased and privileged to stand on the shoulders of giants like John Edward Lee and Victor L. Nash Williams and George Boone and David Sienkiewicz and all sorts of other people too. So it's a story, it's a step in the story, but it's not the be-all and end-all. There is still a great deal that remains unknown about Roman Caerleon, and hopefully in future you and I will be sitting here listening to somebody else talking about the most recent excavations. I'd also like to say on Andy's behalf that the book and the project itself, we weren't the only two people involved. There were an awful lot of people to whom we are very indebted for their contributions. We estimate about 300 people took part in the excavation and also during the post-excavation years, which were many. So without them, the book wouldn't exist, I wouldn't be standing here, and you wouldn't be listening to me either. Now, we closed the excavation. It's about 20 years now since Andy and I first sat down and talked about possibly digging in Caerleon. It's so long ago that we can remember where it was, but we can't remember when. It's kind of a bit hazy. It's one of those black and white sort of memories. But to give you an illustration of how much time has gone by, this is Andy and me sitting on top of a scaffold tower. We don't use these anymore for photography, we use drones. I don't know what we're talking about, probably where we're going to go for a drink later on this evening, or what pudding we wanted to eat, or maybe something about the archaeology. These are the two young directors of the Priory Field excavation in 2008. And these are the two, still looking quite young, I have to say, directors of the Priory Field excavation only a few months ago at the Society of Antiquaries in London, where we launched our book. 15, 20 years or so. I think you'll notice that perhaps the hair is a bit thinner and certainly a lot grayer. We might be a bit thicker around the middle, I don't know. But the ravages of time, on me at least, don't seem to have taken too much of a toll. So a long time has passed since we finished the excavation and me standing in front of you today. And that's because the excavation was large and complex and produced enormous quantities of finds, which are going to be some of the main things I'm going to show you today, this evening. And it took a very long time to work our way through all of this material and to understand what it tells us about Roman Caerllion and bring it together in a way that is coherent and comprehensible and also comprehensive too. So what I'm hoping to do today is to give you a little bit of a background to Roman Caerllion very quickly, and then get on with some highlights from the dig and from the report. They are edited highlights. Both Andy and I are finds people, so there's going to be a lot about interesting finds, we hope. But there's all sorts of stuff in there if you're into science, if you're into pottery. I won't talk a great deal about those, but there's lots and lots and lots of things that you can find out more about in the book itself. Now, Caerllion is a very special place for all sorts of reasons. And one of the main reasons for its specialness is because it's one of 3 sites in Britain where you can investigate a permanent Roman legionary fortress. The others are underneath York and Chester today. You can see the names of the fortresses there on the slide above me, and also the legions that were based in them. Caerleon was known to the Romans as Isca, and it was the location of it was the headquarters or the base of the 2nd Augustan Legion, whose shirt I'm very proud to wear as an honorary 2nd Augustan Legion legionary, or perhaps prefect or something like that, I don't really know. It's also a special place because it's, unlike York and Chester, we can actually access the Roman remains at Caerleon relatively easily. Caerleon doesn't have medieval and modern cities sitting on top of it, and large parts of the fortress and the surrounding suburbs are free of modern buildings. This is an aerial photograph of Caerleon, as you can see, with the outline of the fortress's walls shown in red. The area that we're going to be looking at today, if I can get the cursor to work, is down here. This is Priory Field, and this was the focus of our project when we initiated it in 2005. There are very few places in the Roman world where you can access a legionary fortress as easily and as efficiently as at Caerleon. And given the history that Jeremy outlined to you earlier, it won't be a surprise that Caerleon is one of the best known and best understood legionary fortresses from anywhere in the Roman Empire, which, when you bear in mind how big the empire was, stretching from Scotland in the north to Jordan and Syria in the east and Morocco in the south, if I tell you that Caerleon is one of half a dozen sites within that area where we have access like we do at Caerleon, then I hope that you understand how special it is. And what a privilege it was, of course, to be allowed or able to excavate here. This is the plan of Isca as we understand it today. It's the culmination of a great deal of work, both by archaeologists digging in the ground, but also by geophysicists using more modern technology to see the remains of buried Roman buildings. And it is the most complete plan of any legionary fortress anywhere in the Roman Empire. There is one space, one area, Insula 22 up here, about which we know very little, but otherwise most of the buildings that filled in Isca are known about to some extent or another, some more complete than others. We wanted to concentrate on Priory Field because it was one of the few places about which very little was known 20 or so years ago. The slide above me gives you an idea about what Caerleon and its main suburb to the south might have looked like at the end of the 1st century AD, between 100 and 150 AD, something like that. We wanted to concentrate on Priory Field because 20 years ago, very little was known about it. So my colleagues, when I was working at Cardiff University, Alan Lane, and also Tim Young from GeoArc, undertook a series of geophysical surveys with students, undergraduate students from the university, using magnetometry primarily, to explore what might lie beneath Priory Field as we know it today. And they discovered very quickly a whole series of previously unknown buildings underneath Priory Field, including barrack blocks, 3 granaries, and part of a large courtyard, square courtyard building whose function we weren't entirely sure about. This is the moment when Andy and I sat down in a pub in London and talked about maybe following up these surveys with more digging in the ground, because geophysics is great at telling you what might lie beneath the ground, but less good at telling you how old it is, the condition it survives in, or even what functions, what kind of activities might have taken place there. For that, you need to put spades in the ground, which we first did in 2007. We carried out what's called an evaluation excavation. We excavated a large trench in Golledge's Field on the other side of the Broadway, as well as 6 test pits in Priory Field, which showed that the Roman archaeology survives very well indeed, not that far beneath the ground, and that, as far as we could tell, there was very little post-Roman, medieval and modern disturbance there at all. The trial trench that you can see on the left-hand side of the slide went across part of the Centurions' quarters for the Legion's elite first cohort, which I'll come back to in a little while. So a report about this evaluation season is contained in the book too, and following on from that, and also a series of resistivity surveys, again undertaken by Cardiff University in 2007, we decided that we would like to apply for permission to excavate a much larger trench, not to explore the barracks, not to explore the granaries, but to look at this enigmatic square courtyard building, which we thought might have served a variety of functions. It could have been a store building, it could have been a workshop, it could have been a hospital, and there were other possibilities too. So our primary objective was to answer the question, what was this building for, and to better understand its history in the Roman period and afterwards. These are aerial photographs taken by Toby Driver in 2007 of our trench in Priory Field. It looks quite big. It looked very big when you stood by the side of it, but it represents something like under 0.5% of the total internal area of Ischia, of the fortress of Ischia. So it really is keyhole stuff, but it was the first excavation, as Jeremy alluded to, that was put in a place because we wanted it. We wanted to answer certain questions, and as I mentioned on a slide earlier on, it was the first excavation of a legionary store building from anywhere in the Roman world. We uncovered about 2/3 of the front range of the courtyard building, the plan that you can see in front of you here, and the bit that was revealed shown in yellow. And that consisted of 7 different spaces. We revealed the entranceway, a guard room, a probable stairwell, and 4 small rooms, which you can see here, 1, 2, 6, and 7, which I'll come back to in a little while, looking for evidence to tell us about the history of the building and also what activities might have been undertaken in them. We spent 10 weeks digging that trench, but in 2008 and again in 2010. And at the end of that 10 weeks, we had uncovered everything that we needed to. We'd gone from the top to the very bottom, and we had the beginnings of the story of this particular structure. The students at the end, the staff and students at the end of our 10th week in 2010, we used to illustrate where the walls of the building had been. which you can see here, and through the magic of PowerPoint, I can show you a little bit more clearly. As you will see very clearly from that photograph, most of the Roman walls have gone because the stone was robbed in the Roman and post-Roman period to be used elsewhere in Caerleon and also in the area of South Wales too. The inset on the bottom left shows one of the very few bits of the building that actually survived above ground. Elsewhere, the Roman building simply survives as negative trenches, robber trenches, where you can see, but from which you can rebuild or reconstruct the ground plan, the blueprint of that particular building. And if we compare it to similar buildings from other fortresses around the empire, we can see it has a number of similarities to fortresses on the Rhine and on the Danube, and also in North Africa and the Middle East. And to give you and me an impression of what it might have looked like, to find similar-ish buildings, you have to go to Italy today, to the city of Rome, but in particular to Ostia, Rome's great port on the mouth of the River Tiber, where a number of buildings known as Horea, or store buildings and warehouses, survive rather well, as you can see on the top right, and reconstructed in the picture on the right-hand side below it. Our building was not made out of brick like these, it was made out of stone, but I hope that gives you a good idea of what the Caerleon building in Priory Field might have looked like once upon a time. Now, the results of the excavation can be described in various different ways. We now have a very good understanding of the history of this part of Caerleon. We know that the building we excavated was the first structure on that particular plot, and that it was built sometime between 90 and 110 AD. It was rebuilt. There was some tinkering around with the internal fittings around about 200, but it was in use for about 2 centuries or so, up until 300, when it seems to have been abandoned, like other parts of Roman Caerleon too, before the building seems to have either collapsed in on itself or been demolished, so that by 350, thereabouts, it had disappeared. And then we saw that there was a reoccupation of that particular plot, which I'll come back to in a little while, before it became Priory Field and remained an open space for probably the last 1,000 years or so, give or take a few years either side. Fascinatingly, we know the name of the individual, of the Roman officer, who seems to have been responsible for the building of the Priory Field building. His name is recorded in this inscription that you can see in front of you here. His name was Flavius Rufus, and the chevron, or the number 7, on the left-hand side of this inscription here shows that he was a centurion, and he wasn't just any old centurion, he was a PP centurion, he was the primus pilus, he was the first-rank centurion, the most senior of the 53 centurions. And his name tells us that he, or probably his father, was made a Roman citizen during the reign of one of the Flavian emperors between 70 and 96, there or thereabouts, which fits with the construction of the building at the beginning of the 2nd century. By this point in time, Flavius Rufus was probably in his 40s. He'd re-enlisted in the Roman army. He may well have started out as a private in a legion somewhere, been promoted continuously, so that by the time we pick him up in Caerleon, there is no other mention of this man in the historical archaeological record. He would have been in his 40s, and as I say, one of the most senior officers in the legion, given the responsibility for building our courtyard structure, which he and his men were proud to record in this inscription, which may well have stood or sat above the entranceway into it. We know from the archaeological evidence that the building that we dug wasn't a hospital and it wasn't a workshop either, it was a storeroom. The 4 square rooms that we excavated, none of them had particularly durable floors, there were no mosaics, no concrete floors, the walls were simply whitewashed, there were very small windows around, suggesting that it had a sort of utilitarian function. But the real key to understanding what the building was for was found in 2 of the rooms where their contents were sealed by the building's upper structure and its roof as they collapsed inwards, probably in the first half of the 4th century AD. In one of those rooms, we found a variety of boxes and furniture and all sorts of other things that seemed to be to do with personal life. But in this room, the room that you can see in front of you, which is room 2, we found a very extensive scatter of archaeological artifacts, mainly copper and iron, which was scattered across the floor, sealed by the building's roof that had collapsed in on itself. That was a significant challenge, and this is one of the reasons, if not the main reason, why the book I'm talking about has taken so long to reach publication, because dealing with these objects was a monumental task that involved huge numbers of people at the National Museum Wales and also at Cardiff University. And once we had uncovered all of those artifacts lying on the floor, we were very pleased to be able to call in the expert assistance of archaeological and conservation curators from the National Museum to help lift many of these very fragmentary and fragile artifacts off the floor, which you can see happening here on the bottom left. You can see Penny Hill, Mark Lewis and Evan Chapman, who lifted 38 soil blocks from room 2, took them away so they could be excavated under laboratory conditions and excavated very carefully. Here you can see Penny, Mark and Evan working away to define the 1 or 2 of the soil blocks before they're lifted. They're encased in plaster of Paris. Some of them were quite small, some of them were absolutely massive and needed 6 or 7 of us just to lift out of the trench. These were then taken in the back of my Land Rover into the centre of Cardiff, squeezed in through the National Museum's back gates, and then taken down to the conservation labs, where people like Julia Tubman spent a great deal of time excavating all of those 38 soil blocks, taking away the overlying material to reveal the finds that were contained in these. So what Julia is looking at, it took her 9 months to dig this, by the way, with a few wooden spatulas and small teaspoons. And what she's doing is she's clearing away the debris that overlay the artifacts in this particular soil block, revealing the floor from room 2, which has been moved about 25 miles to the east, and the objects that sat on top of them. And what we found was quite remarkable, really, and without the efforts of Mark and Julia and all the other people that worked on it over many years, we would have lost all of this very fragile evidence. This is one of these soil blocks prior to lifting. And when I took this photograph, I realized that I was looking at it, and somebody in it was looking at me. And the person that was looking at me had been sitting there for 1800 years or so, just waiting. And there they are. We can see the head, a little head staring upwards from the ground. You can see the bust, just the head, and they seem to be wearing a peaked cap, a Phrygian or Eastern cap. When this was removed and taken back to Cardiff and then excavated under laboratory conditions, this is what that one piece ended up looking like. It's a leaf-shaped plaque made of copper, made of bronze, with a head in the center of it that was a separate attachment. And as you can see from the picture on the left-hand side of the slide, it was found in association with lots of other finds, bronze and copper alloy too, lots of little round pins and discs and studs and all sorts of other things. There were several hundred of these contained in that one soil block alone. So after excavation, we then started to think about what this might be. And we noted, or it was noted, that many of the pins had been bent around about 3 millimeters down their shafts and all in the same direction, as if they had been attached to something. And analysis under the scanning electron microscope at the museum and the university showed that that material was a leather backing of some kind. And it was actually Penny Hill and Mark Lewis who had that amazing eureka moment when they realized that what we'd excavated in Caerleon was one of these. This comes from Vindolanda, a site on Hadrian's Wall, and it's a chamfron, it's a decorated horse's headpiece that a Roman cavalryman or a Roman officer's horse would have worn on various special occasions, ceremonies and parades and that kind of thing. The Roman writer Arrian describes what these might have been like, and they're a little bit, the way he describes them, you have to imagine it's a bit like Trooping the Colour or something like that, where the Roman soldiers would have put on a display to show their martial prowess, but also to demonstrate how good they were at being Roman soldiers. The little head on the leaf that we found would have been on the horse's right-hand ear guard, which you can see here, and overall, the horse and their rider would have looked something like this. So a special piece of military equipment in that part of room 2. We also found in it, and associated with it, a whole series of other copper finds like these bronze or copper scales, which, as you can see from the little inset, some of them have still got the wire that attach them to themselves and also to a leather backing of some kind. Now, we thought at the time that this might have been part of the chamfron of the horse's headpiece, but actually other finds from inside that room suggest something slightly different. This is one of the less photogenic soil blocks that we lifted, soil block 5. It's in the ground, it's encased and then taken away to the National Museum. It x-rayed, it then conserved and cleaned and presented to us, which led to a lot of head scratching. And in this case, it was a colleague in Scotland, Mike Bishop, who was the one who had that particular eureka moment, because he realized and told us that what we were looking at was actually part of a separate set of body armor that would have been made of scale. We'll come back to the other kind of typical Roman body armor in a minute, but made of scale, which is normally associated either with cavalrymen or with officers. And that particular iron plate with its holes in would have been on the left-hand side of a soldier's scale armor, which would have connected the two bits together across the chest. This is a reconstruction of a Roman legionary wearing the kind of scale armor we're talking about, and here you can see where our Priory Field breastplate would have sat on that particular soldier, and we think that it, or something like it, would have been decorated, and, funnily enough, not a million miles away from the iron plate, we found a very thin decorated bronze sheet, which you can see here. It's decorated with small punch marks. It's difficult to see on this, but Ian Dennis at Cardiff University did a fantastic drawing, and it's decorated with a Capricorn, which, as my t-shirt showed you earlier on, was the emblem of the Second Augustan Legion. So the breastplate and this copper sheet and the scale indicate that there was at least one set of fairly high status scale armor also located in room 2. But most of the artifacts that we dug up in room 2 at Priory Field were iron. They didn't survive very well in the ground, but by careful excavation, this, by the way, is the soil block that Julia was digging away at in the basement of the National Museum in Cardiff. And by looking at it very carefully, and also the x-rays, and also all the other soil blocks, it quickly became clear that what we were looking at were various sets of the kind of Roman armor that soldiers wore, which you can see on the right-hand side, segmented iron armor, known to us today as lorica segmentata, just means segmented armor, which is instantly recognizable from just about any program or film about the Romans, Gladiator, and all sorts of other things too. If you see a Roman soldier, then they're normally wearing one of these suits of armor. And the room that we were in contained at least one set. The sets, though, seem to be incomplete. It's as if they'd been taken apart, and the various different elements, so the bits from the stomach, the bits from the shoulders, the bits from the arms, seem to have been stacked together as if there wasn't just one or two sets sitting there. There were multiple sets that had been disassembled, maybe because they were there to be repaired, maybe they were there because they were there to be recycled in somehow, we don't know. But what's interesting is that by the time the building collapsed in on itself, this kind of armor must have been of some kind of antiquity at the time. The chamfron is normally thought to date to the 1st century AD. The kind of scale armor I described before is normally thought to be early Roman as well. The lorica segmentata of this particular type, which is known as Newstead lorica, is also thought to be 2nd or early 3rd century AD. So the room that we excavated seems to have contained various different sets of military equipment that were at least 50 years old and may well have been 100, 150, perhaps 200 years old by the time the building collapsed in on itself. And so we think that what we were looking at was a room where equipment that was thought to be special, because it was used in special ceremonies, would have been stored and perhaps kept because it was special enough to need to be recycled. Remarkably, at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, archaeologists in Austria, at the site of Carnuntum, excavated a store building not too dissimilar to ours, where in one room they found the remains of various, lots and lots and lots of military equipment, including weaponry and body armor, that seems to have been stored, as you can see in this reconstruction, on shelving on the rear wall and on the side walls. And we imagine that the room that we excavated would have looked similar to this. We have no evidence for shields, and we don't have very much evidence for swords and for spears, but we imagine that the room we excavated might have looked something like this, but for perhaps military equipment that was reserved for special occasions, maybe for ceremonies, maybe for something else. We don't know. What's also interesting is that we didn't just find evidence for military equipment. There was plenty of evidence for personal objects too, and this is a sort of flavor of the kind of things that we found during the excavation. Some of the nicer, more photogenic finds. They include a finger ring on the top left-hand side. You can see it's an iron finger ring, and it has an intaglio in the center of it, which was made out of red jasper, and into that red jasper had been engraved a representation of Bonus Eventus, a Roman deity representing good fortune or good luck. You can see Bonus Eventus here with an offering dish in his right hand and something in his left hand, which is possibly not what you think it might be. It's several bunches of grapes that he's projecting out in front of him, representing prosperity into the future. We have, as you can see on the bottom left of the slide, a very fantastic lion-headed mount, which might have come from an item of furniture, a chair or a bench or something like that, or perhaps from a box. We also have a splendid brooch, two brooches here. This is a star or flower-shaped brooch, which would have kept somebody's cloak together, and then one of three fish-shaped brooches that were found in one of the rooms too. So the excavation tells us about the Roman army, but it also tells us about the people who lived and worked in Roman Caerleon all those years ago. Not all of the finds that we uncovered were quite so photogenic. We found about nearly 2,000 finds that were recorded as registered artifacts. This is one of them. It's a lead sheet that has been folded over and bent. You can see it has a hole in it in the center, and it was likely that it was a baggage label of something like that. And we took the decision relatively early on to see if we might be able to unwrap it and actually see what was inside. And I'm glad we did. It was a slightly nervous moment when Megan De Silva, the conservation student in the central picture here, with a hairdryer to warm it up and under very close supervision from her tutors at Cardiff University, very carefully and very slowly but very ably unwrapped that particular lead tag, which we then cleaned up and sent off to Roger Tomlin at the University of Oxford, who was able to decipher and translate it, and I put both of those things up here. And what's remarkable about it is that it contains a word in Latin that is not known outside Caerleon. It's never been known before. The last word on it is pingatarem. That's not known from Virgil, from any other Latin source. Roger Tomlin suspects that it comes from the verb pingo, which means to decorate, and the translation of this particular luggage label, or whatever it might have been, is that something that it was wrapped around belonged to the century of Domitius Maternus, of Aurelius Severus, and whatever it was had been polished and decorated. It's a bit unfortunate we don't know what it was. It would be really nice to know, but this particular tag gives us the name of yet 2 more men who served in the Roman legion and were based here at Caerleon all those years ago. After 350, the store building was demolished and levelled, and a new period of occupation began. And that occupation comprised at least 2 buildings, some of the walls of which survive, and I've outlined those in yellow here. The main building that we excavated was a 3-room rectangular building with, in the very central room, a circular pit that contained large quantities of charred cereals. The building wasn't very well built. It looked Roman because it's rectangular and it's made out of stone. It doesn't look very Roman because it was earth bonded, not mortar bonded, and also it doesn't look very competently Roman or competently built because it wasn't built on any foundations. The building itself, its walls, undulated over the existing ground surface, and lo and behold, it fell down. And we found evidence for its collapse in the front of it too. When we excavated this, we weren't able to say which period of Caerleon's history this building fitted into. Was it late Roman? Was it medieval? Was it later perhaps? And it was only when we came to, when we received the carbon dates from the charred cereal remains in the central pit that it became clear that the building we're looking at was erected and occupied and fell down in between 430 and 600 AD, which is the kind of time, as Jeremy alluded to before, of the A-man, Arthur, but let's not worry about him too much here while we're here. But what's important is that this is the first evidence for occupation for people actually living in Caerleon in the post-Roman period. But what's even more remarkable is that we are in the post-Roman period in terms of history and history books. The Roman period ends 400, 410, but we have people living like Romans, living in Roman-style buildings and using Roman-style material culture at least 100 years, if not longer, after the Romans have left this island. So at least in this particular part of South Wales, or at least in that particular part of this site in South Wales, we can see Roman continuity far later than has ever been suspected before, which is perhaps one of the most remarkable discoveries of our excavation altogether. So, 15, 20 years have gone by. I had to dig these pictures out. These are the excavation teams without whom Andy and I could not have written this book, could not have excavated the site. The 2007, 2010 and 2007, 8 and 10 excavation teams who remarkably excavated that site so proficiently and provided all of the evidence that I've described to you today. We trained, I don't think any of them were released from prison, actually. I don't think any of them were like that. I think mostly they were undergraduate and postgraduate students. We had a number of volunteers. It's nice to see quite a few people who dug with us in the audience today. Whether they've been incarcerated since then, I can't say. But we were a training dig. The first training dig in Caerleon, we had students from Cardiff, from UCL and from Durham who came to learn how to be field archaeologists with us. Many of them came back again. We had volunteers, 70-odd volunteers who came to work with us for afternoons or weekends or slightly longer and who enjoyed working with us too. And a large number of the students that worked with us have gone on to be professional archaeologists. One of the other great things about the excavation was that it was the first time that an excavation in Caerleon had been able to open its doors to the wider public. And what we found very quickly, and we had to learn on the job, I have to say, it was challenging to both run an excavation and deal with the public interest, particularly in the first decade of the 21st century. What we found very quickly was that, firstly, people want to know about what we'd found, wanted to know what we'd found, and they wanted to be part of it. They wanted to be part of it by either coming and digging, or coming and cleaning, or coming and helping out, or they wanted to be part of it by following us online. It's hard to imagine now, but there was a period of time before Twitter, and our excavation occurred just when Twitter just got going. And I remember Andy setting up a Twitter account and me thinking, well, nothing's going to happen with this. This is rubbish. We had 104 followers, and then we moved on and went to dig elsewhere. Goes to show how much I know. But everybody was very keen to follow our blogs, our websites, and all sorts of other things too, and also to come and see us. 7,000 people came to see the excavation over the 10 weeks of the two main excavation seasons, and students organised and ran guided tours twice a day, and also various different events during open days that involved colouring competitions, dressing up as Roman soldiers, using equipment borrowed from the Roman Legionary Museum, helping with wet sieving, and also making your own pots and all sorts of things. The upswell of interest in Caerleon and Newport and the rest of South Wales was fantastic to see and fantastic to be part of, and is possibly one of the bits that I'm most proud of, and I know that Andy is too. So, as I can draw everything to a close now, I come back to where I started. It's been a long and challenging process leading here, but here I am and here you are, and I'm very pleased that we got here eventually. I've already mentioned that we couldn't have done this on our own, and we are greatly indebted to a huge number of people for making our journey quite so interesting. It's nice to see that our book has been nominated as for a Book of the Year, in the Book of the Year Award in the Current Archaeology 2026 Awards. There are 12 great books in that lineup. We are the only excavation report. We are the only book about a Welsh topic. I'll leave it there. If you would like to have a look at our nomination and the other books that are nominated, then please feel free on the Current Archaeology website. If you are interested in finding out more about Priory Field or some of the other research projects that I've been involved with over the last 15, 20 years or so, you can look on my website, vianovaarchaeology.com. But otherwise, I'm on behalf of Andy, wherever Andy is at the moment, I'd like to say what a great pleasure it was talking to you here this evening. I hope you've enjoyed it. So, thank you very much for listening, everybody.
Lucid account of this important excavation which has opened up new avenues on Roman Caerleon. Will you take some questions?
Absolutely.
Questions? Gentleman there?
What do I do with this? Sorry, I think particularly for people online, do we not need to use this? Okay, yes, I could do that.
Would you want this back?
Thank you. So as I understand it, the storeroom, and you described these really interesting pieces of armour and so on and so forth, collapsed. Was it collapsed or was it demolished? But if it had collapsed, perhaps it suggests it was an old store cupboard and the stuff wasn't of any interest anymore.
No, I think that's absolutely right. There are different bits of some parts of the building collapsed and some seem to have been demolished. Is this work? Yeah, the room I described, those artifacts that I showed you are sealed by the roof. Other rooms, there's no roof, as if that's already gone. And you may well be right that by the time the building was disused or abandoned, which is around about 300 thereabouts, those items of military equipment may well have been thought to be just either useless or non-recyclable or something. We really don't know. It's no coincidence, though, that lots of different parts of the legionary fortress seem to go out of use around about 300 AD. There is a significant change in Caerleon's history at that point in time.
Any
Yes.
more questions?
One over here.
Thank you for a fascinating talk. The post-Roman building, was it a dwelling place or was it a workshop or some kind? Have you any idea of the use of the post-Roman building that you excavated?
We think, from the evidence available to us, that it was probably an agricultural building of some kind. So the central room with the pit with the charred grain, we think that was a storage pit for grain, which is wheat and barley, no oats, wheat and barley, that seems to have been sieved and treated, suggesting that it was intended for human consumption, not animals. So we think that's what the central room was. The right-hand room, the southern room, may well have, it was almost certainly an animal pen, so perhaps a space for a few sheep or pigs, something like that. In the other room, we don't know. So probably an agricultural building, which goes to show that even though people were living in Caerleon, let's say around about 500 AD, in a Romanish way, or a Romano-British way, they're not living in the same Roman way as their ancestors 100 or 200 years before. That part of Caerleon has changed from being in the center of Roman legionary fortress to basically a farmyard of some kind.
Any more questions?
Any others? Give it a go.
Given it is working. Given that most of the, if not all, of the Roman centurions, including the chief centurions, which Flavius, of course, was, could he have been buried in that grave that they discovered, the stone Roman grave that was discovered on Belmont Hill? Could that be him, do you think?
Well, it could be,
There's-
but it might not be. It's very difficult to, as you understand, it's very difficult without a name saying here lies Flavius Rufus. It could be one of any number of individuals. I didn't mention it, but Roger Tomlin in his report goes into some detail about who Flavius Rufus might have been. And there is an inscription from Ravenna in northeastern Italy that was erected by a Flavius Rufus, who had been primus pilus of the Second Augustan Legion. It's not his grave, it's the grave of a freedwoman, possibly his wife, that he erected in her memory. Now, we can't say that that Flavius Rufus and our Flavius Rufus were the same either, but to answer your question, yes, it could be, but also these men were highly mobile, and it may well be that after his years here in Caerleon, he left and went somewhere else, and in a way I quite like to imagine that he went off with his wife and they ended their days in northeastern Italy rather than South Wales. But why not? It's all speculation. There's a question.
Yes, good evening. Do you have any plans to revisit which would attract further visitors to Caerleon in the years to come?
In Priory Field?
Well, anywhere within the areas that have been identified.
Personally, no. Priory Field is a big open space that you can see now. It's very difficult to lay out Roman remains, particularly remains that were robbed like that has been. If you go into, the only way to do it is really like the Fortress Baths has been done, which is to cover it over. And as you can imagine, it takes a great deal of time and a great deal of resources, particularly money. So Priory Field, the trench was backfilled, and it'll remain backfilled for ever, I would imagine. Elsewhere, there are plenty of opportunities. I think Jeremy mentioned at the beginning that there was a sense once upon a time, not too long ago, that everything that was there to be known about Caerleon was already known. But we've shown, and others have shown, that that's actually not the case. we've probably only just scratched the surface. So in terms of finding out more about Caerllion, rather than putting things on display, there's huge potential here. And as I alluded to at the very end of my talk, there's also a great appetite from the public, both in Caerllion and Newport and elsewhere, to be involved in that kind of thing and to find out more about it. People are fascinated, and I'm glad to say it, people are fascinated by by the past, and they find Caerllion an absolutely fascinating place to come and visit.
Any more questions?
There's one in the centre here, Di.
In our church, St Andrew's Church at Tredonoc, there's a stone inscription dedicated to a legionary who obviously retired from the Legion. I think his name was Julianus. So he must have retired from the Legion and spent his retirement around Caerllion, possibly marrying a local girl, perhaps. But it's very interesting. But obviously, there's a lot more work to be done in Caerllion and in the surrounding area, actually.
Absolutely spot on. I think, one of the things that we are now much more aware of than archaeologists were in the past is the impact that the Legion based at Caerllion had on the local landscape and, of course, on the people that lived here before the Romans came. The people of South Wales, the Silures that Jeremy mentioned, didn't become part of the Roman Empire voluntarily. And as you move forwards through time in the Roman period, many of the soldiers who were recruited to be legionaries were probably the sons of retired legionaries. And so asking those questions, where did they go to? Where did they live? What kind of lives did they lead? Are now much more relevant than they were before. And people like Andy and myself and others are much more inclined to sort of think outside the walls and the gates of the fortress and think about what impact it had over the 3.5 centuries of the Roman period. There was a question somewhere here.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions, actually. One's an observation, really. So my voice is going. One's just a follow-up from the question, the gentleman over there. Of course, there are fantastic opportunities to do more at Roman Caerleon in the future. And that is really at the heart of the partnership that's been established between Cadw and Gaethel Cymru, National Museum of Wales, and with Newport County Council. And working in partnership, there are great opportunities to open up transform this place into something that is going to be an unmissable visitor attraction in future years. I had a question as well, Peter, and thank you for the explanation of what a meticulous and really very carefully carried out excavation. Wonderful. I've got a question about the use of the storeroom, room 2. So it's fascinating that what your interpretation of these very carefully curated, special pieces of military armour would look like they've been there for potentially a couple of centuries. And then it came to a very untimely end with the destruction. It was linked to the question behind me there. I find it extraordinary, really, that these objects wouldn't have been recovered because they were so special and because of their clearly such great value. They wouldn't have been recovered and removed from there before the destruction took place. One possible explanation is that they were deliberately buried, of course, and deliberately covered. Can you speculate yourself on which of those is possibly true?
Yeah, I don't think the deliberate burial, the sort of special deposition, fits most of the evidence. I think a better explanation goes back to the fact that they had been considered special in some way in the past. By the time they were then became sealed by the building, something had happened that transformed them into disarticulated pieces of what once had been special equipment. So for whatever reason, they'd sat there for a very long time. Then perhaps because the leather straps didn't work anymore or something, they weren't usable. It's almost as if they then become something that is to be recycled. And particularly on the segmentata, the plate armour, what's interesting with those is that all of the copper fittings, or many of the copper fittings that held it all together, had been deliberately sheared off as part of the process of disassembling and then stacking them, as I said before, girth hoop to girth hoop and shoulder hoop to shoulder hoop. So something had happened, but for whatever reason, they ended up staying in the same room. Maybe they moved from one room to another, we don't really know. The alternative is that when the building came in, when the building fell in on itself in that particular room, people then tried to get back to it under the roof and the other remains of the building and sort of broke it all apart. But actually the evidence seems to suggest that that taking apart and that that fragmentation occurred at the end of its life. It's one of those, as an archaeologist, Gwilym, yourself, you know that an interesting and useful way of thinking about finds is through their biographies. And just like me and you know, artifacts have histories and life histories. And an object that starts out with one purpose can change its purpose multiple times throughout its history. What we're looking at, of course, is just the final part, the final chapter in that story, and what we then need to do is kind of go backwards and reimagine. So I think personally that it has something to do with the fact that they had been special once upon a time, were less so when the building came in, fell in on itself, and that's the snapshot of their biographies that we have. I think we're...
Any more questions?
There might... One, oh, yes?
I had a question about the technologies used, because I know you mentioned I think it was a magnometer used to scan the excavation sites. And I was wondering, did you use any other technologies to map out points of interest? And are there any new technologies today that you would have liked to have back then to find any different points where you might have explored?
Do you mean in terms of looking for buildings beneath the ground?
Possibly for artifacts, for structures in general.
So in terms of geophysics, the two techniques that we used then were magnetometry and resistivity, and they're based on different principles. There's a newer technique called ground penetrating radar, GPR, and there are also other things too, which you can use to see beneath the ground. In terms of technologies more generally, one of the big changes that has happened in archaeology over the last 30 years is the application of science to archaeology. And on our particular project, we were able to use stable isotope analysis, looking at the origins of animals, where animals that were consumed in Caerllion might have been reared. We also used organic residue analysis, which looked at animal fats inside Roman cooking pots. We used scan electron microscopes and XRF to look at the chemical components of different artifact types, particularly bronze and copper alloy. The list goes on and on and on, and new techniques in archaeology are coming online all the time as we borrow from other parts of the scientific world and see what their applications could be. So that's a big change, and if this had been a different audience, then I might have talked to you about all the science too, but I couldn't fit it all in. Maybe one more, Di?
I was just wondering where we could see the things that were found now. Are they in the Roman Museum in Caerleon?
They are. They are at the moment, Mark Lewis, the curator, is accessioning them all. I think some are on display, and I believe, Di, there is a plan to put more of them on display in the not too distant future, which actually, if that's okay with you, probably is a good point, Di, for me to hand over to you for the final part. Is that a good idea?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't think I need this, do I? Noswaith pawb, good evening everybody. Madam Mayor, everybody, wonderful guests, thank you for coming this evening. My name is Di Price. I am the head of the National Roman Legion Museum, the wonderful museum just on the other side of the road here, Museum Street, from this church. And I'm joined up here by our Caerllion community advocates because my other role is the lead for the project Caerllion, Rufeining, Roman Caerllion. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but first of all, just to say a massive thank you for you all for coming this evening, but also to the Monmouthshire Antiquarian Association for helping us to set this up and doing a lot of the heavy lifting in getting this evening set up, to the church for hosting us as well, and obviously to Jeremy and to Peter for talking this evening. Now, I'm joined here by the community advocates. What we're working on is a project that has already been alluded to, the idea that the Amgueddfa Cymru National Museum, that the Cadw organisation and Newport City Council are working together to deliver a new vision for Roman Caerllion, a new visitor experience. This isn't going to happen overnight, this is going to take time. And one of the reasons it's going to take time is the way we want to go about doing it. And this really is groundbreaking. It's a different way of working. The three organisations don't just want to get together and do this. We want to do it with you. So it's going to take time to collaborate and work together, which is why we have the community advocates who are up with me here. We have 6 in total, 5 are here at the moment. Hugh Wilkinson, Denise Brennan, Cherie Hughes, Neil Pollard and Brett Childs. We also have Justine Desmond, who can't be with us this evening. And their role is to work with you as the community and us as the partners. And Brett's going to explain a little bit more about that. And this is about the way in which we do this. We have an amazing opportunity with the Roman history, as you've seen from what Peter said this evening, to do something really special, to do something that will be world-class and will be an amazing experience for all. But we need to take time to build this up. And this is the starting point for us, working as a partnership, and the National Lottery Heritage Fund have given us £250,000 of funding that we've started to use to make the initial plans, the first phase of this, to build the overarching vision. And this is going to be done through work looking at interpretation plans and visitor research, but also looking at things like heritage crime and how we can help to make that a lot less of an impact on the wonderful heritage we have here in Caerllion. But also, it's about biodiversity and making sure we support the environment around us. And of course, it's about things like transport plans and infrastructure, because we understand that there is an impact of doing all of this and we want it to work for everyone. And that's why we've been working with other parts in the community too. There is a clean air group that has built a plan and is starting in the next few weeks to do some consultation with people around sort of 8 themes and changes that they want to make to improve the clean air situation, the transport situation around Caerllion. And this is the point, we're talking to them, we're working together on this. This is part of our planning, so that we're doing this in a collective way, so that the impact for everybody, not just the visitors, but to the residents in Caerllion, people of Newport, the surrounding area, will be positive, that it will bring economic benefits as well as cultural benefits as well. So that's what Caerllion, Rufeining, Roman Caerllion is about. Now I'm going to hand over to Brett, who's going to talk a little bit more about the community advocates and their role.
Evening all. Oh, God, there we are. Echo. Yeah, working. So, yeah, thanks, Di, and thanks, Peter and Andrew. It's been fascinating, and it's like, for me, it's such a profound privilege to have this on my doorstep, and I've had it on my doorstep for almost my whole life, and it leads me on to why I wanted to become a community advocate in the first place, because like there's so much potential that this history has, that there's quite literally been unearthed, I suppose, here, and like, us advocates have got such diverse backgrounds, but I think something that's really brought us together is tapping into that potential of like really trying to, you know, share this history more widely. So a little bit about the role, like very basically involved with the partnership in terms of like the various work streams, decision making. It's, as Di said, it's an unprecedented partnership that we're, you know, really keen to be a part from a community perspective as well. We've got, you know, all sorts of future plans coming up, like we're engaging on the future vision, the partnership vision that we're going to have various focus groups and surveys on in February and March. Of course, it doesn't stop there. We've got an email address. We've got a Facebook page where the email address, we're more than happy to receive community engagement, and we're also very heavily involved in local heritage events like this. Got a Facebook page where we'll share updates. And yeah, just really, there's just so much more that we're going to do. And of course, I'll wrap up by saying that we'll just be over there. If you want to come chat to us, there's a lot that we've got to share in this. I mean, it's still very early days. There's so much potential that we've got for this. But I'll hand back over to Di to wrap up.
Thank you very much. So yes, this is going to be a very important project for us. It's going to take a couple of years for us to build this initial stage plan, and then hopefully go back for further funding and to make some very, very then significant changes to create that world-class visitor experience that we're working towards. And you are all part of that. We want you to engage with it. We want to hear your voices in this, and we want you to enjoy the experience of developing as well as then when we have that new Roman experience. Diolch yn fawr pawb. Thank you all very much for coming this evening. As been said before, there are books at the back, opportunities to get signed copies. There should be some refreshments available as well if you're interested in it. Thank you again for coming. Have an amazing weekend. Thank you. Diolch.